My name is Clara, and I am 33 years old. Get out of my house and go live under a bridge for all I care. This family does not harbor useless failures. My father Richard bellowed those words so loudly, his face turned an ugly shade of crimson. My brother-in-law Jamal simply laughed and tossed a crumpled $200 bill at my feet, telling me to catch a ride to a homeless shelter. I did not cry or beg. I just smiled calmly, picked up the cash, and walked out the door. They genuinely believed I was a bankrupt dropout. They had absolutely no idea my personal income exceeded $5 million last year alone. 3 weeks later, they would lose everything. Before I tell you how their blinding arrogance became their ultimate downfall, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever had your own flesh and blood betray your trust in the worst way possible, hit that like and subscribe button. You will absolutely want to hear how this ends. I stood perfectly still in the center of their lavish Connecticut dining room. At 33, I had long since outgrown the terrified little girl who flinched whenever my father raised his voice. Beside Richard stood my mother Diana, swirling a glass of expensive Merlot, her expression one of practiced, elegant disdain. "Your father is right, Clara," Diana sighed, taking a delicate sip. "You just announced that you are closing down that pathetic little soap shop of yours. What exactly did you expect us to do? Fund your lazy lifestyle? You have been a continuous disappointment to our family name for years." She was not entirely wrong about the closing down part, though her understanding of the situation was laughably inaccurate. I had just shut down the small retail front of my cosmetics business. What I had kept entirely hidden from them was the real reason behind that closure. My biolab had just finalized a massive supply contract with 3 of the largest luxury skincare brands in Europe. We were transitioning to a strictly business-to-business model, and my personal take-home profit for the year was astronomical. But to my family, I was still just Clara, the struggling daughter who made cheap soap. From across the expansive mahogany dining table, my younger sister Monica let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Monica was 30 years old, a self-proclaimed lifestyle coach, whose entire career consisted of posting heavily filtered photos funded entirely by our parents. "Honestly, Clara, it is embarrassing," Monica sneered, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet so the light would catch it perfectly. "You are a grown woman acting like a teenager. Look at me and Jamal. We are building an empire, and you are standing here begging for a handout because your little hobby finally went under." Jamal, Monica's husband, stepped forward. He was a 32-year-old African-American investment broker, always draped in impeccably tailored Italian suits that screamed of new money. Jamal had always looked at me like dirt on his shoe, fueled by the toxic narrative my parents fed him that I was the family black sheep. With a theatrical sigh, Jamal reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out his designer money clip, and extracted a single crisp $200 bill. He casually tossed it through the air. The bill fluttered down, landing on the antique Persian rug right at the tip of my scuffed boots. "Here, let me help the poor girl out," Jamal said, flashing a brilliant, arrogant smile. "Take it, Clara. Get yourself a ride to a decent homeless shelter. We have important guests arriving for dessert soon, and we really cannot have you ruining the aesthetic of the evening." The entire room fell dead silent, waiting for my reaction. They wanted tears. They wanted me to fall apart and beg for their mercy. They wanted the familiar rush of power that came from crushing the designated family scapegoat. As I looked down at that green bill, a painful memory flashed unbidden in my mind. I remembered being 22 years old, working grueling double shifts at a diner just to pay off my student loans. On that exact same day, I had watched through the window as my father handed Jamal the keys to a brand new luxury car as an engagement gift for proposing to Monica. The disparity had always been suffocating, but today, looking at the $200 bill on the floor, I did not feel the familiar sting of rejection. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical clarity. I slowly bent down, my movements deliberate and entirely unbothered, and picked up the cash. I smoothed out the corners, folded it neatly, and slipped it into the pocket of my denim jacket. "Thank you, Jamal," I said, my voice eerily calm. The pitch of my voice was so flat, so utterly devoid of emotion, that my mother's confident smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. I will be sure to put this to good use. Without another word, I turned my back on the people who shared my DNA and walked out the heavy oak door. The crisp evening air hit my face refreshing and sharp. I walked down the long sweeping driveway, stepping out of the glow of their perfectly manicured landscape lighting, until I reached the main road. A sleek black Maybach was idling silently in the shadows. The driver, spotting me, immediately stepped out to open the rear door. I slid into the plush leather interior, the quiet hum of the luxury engine wrapping around me like a protective shield. I pulled out my phone and dialed my wealth manager and lit attorney Sylvia. She answered on the first ring. "Well," Sylvia's sharp, professional voice crackled through the speaker. "Did they take the bait?" "Hook, line, and sinker," I replied, placing the $200 bill on the center console. "They genuinely believe I am bankrupt and homeless. Jamal even gave me cab money." Sylvia let out a low, predatory chuckle. "Perfect. I have initiated the silent freeze on your public assets just as you asked. On paper, Clara the soap maker no longer exists. Now we wait to see what they do in the dark." "Activate Phase 2. I commanded, leaning back into the headrest as the Maybach merged onto the highway toward Manhattan. "Let us see just how far their cruelty goes when they think nobody is watching." 3 days later, I sat on the expansive terrace of my $8 million penthouse in Tribeca, sipping a cup of black coffee as the morning sun reflected off the Manhattan skyline. The silence of my home was a stark contrast to the absolute digital warfare erupting on my smartphone. My parents had wasted zero time launching a full-scale scorched earth smear campaign against me. My phone buzzed relentlessly against the glass table. It was an incoming call from Aunt Brenda, my mother's older sister. I let it ring out, watching the notification turn into a venomous voicemail. I did not need to listen to it to know what she was saying because my inbox was already flooded with similar vitriol from the extended family. I opened my messages, scrolling through the barrage of hatred with a detached clinical fascination. "I heard you are on drugs." Clara read a text from my cousin. "That is absolutely disgusting. Do not you dare come near our house looking for a handout." I swiped to the next message. "Your father had a mild heart episode because of the stress you put him through." "You are a monster." Read another from an uncle I had not spoken to in 4 years. Diana and Richard had spun a masterclass in gaslighting. According to the narrative, they had successfully seeded throughout our entire social circle. I had not just failed at business. In their twisted version of reality, I was a degenerate gambler and an addict who had shown up at their estate demanding their retirement savings, throwing a violent tantrum when they heroically tried to set boundaries. This was a classic maneuver. Whenever I achieved something independent of them, they diminished it. When I was 22, Diana actively manipulated my relatives into thinking I was irresponsible, so I would be forced to sign over my grandmother's trust fund to Monica as seed money. Now faced with what they assumed was my total ruin, they were turning my supposed failure into their own tragic storyline to farm sympathy from their wealthy country club friends. I opened my social media applications. Monica, true to her narcissistic nature, had immediately capitalized on the fabricated drama for engagement. She had posted a black and white, somber-looking selfie, clutching a mug of tea with both hands, while staring mournfully out a window. The caption was an essay in performative victimhood. "Sometimes the hardest thing we have to do is set boundaries with toxic family members." The post began, "It breaks my heart that my older sister has chosen a path of self-destruction and jealousy. Jamal and I offered her help, but you cannot save someone who wants to drown. Please respect my family's privacy during this traumatic time." She followed it up with a string of calculated hashtags about mental health, protecting your peace, and family boundaries. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Monica's post already had thousands of likes and hundreds of comments praising her for her bravery. This was exactly how the Golden Child operated. She could effortlessly weaponize my supposed failure to paint herself as a tragic, empathetic heroine. She had done the exact same thing when we were kids, crying on cue to get me grounded for breaking a vase she herself had smashed. But now she was weaponizing an audience of thousands, using my fabricated downfall to boost her lifestyle coaching brand. The heavy glass door of the terrace slid open, and Sylvia stepped out carrying a secure tablet and a thick manila folder. She wore a sharp charcoal gray suit, her face entirely devoid of amusement. Sylvia had been my legal shield for the past 3 years, expertly guiding my corporate mergers and fiercely protecting my intellectual property from opportunistic competitors. I have archived all the social media posts, text messages, and voicemails, Sylvia said, taking a seat on the sleek lounge chair opposite me. We now have 62 documented instances of direct defamation from your parents and your sister. If you want to pursue a civil suit for slander and libel, we have a slam dunk case. They are creating a verifiable paper trail of malice. I shook my head slowly, setting my coffee cup down on the table. Defamation is a slap on the wrist, Sylvia. They have money to burn on lawyers, and they would just spin a lawsuit into more proof that I am unhinged and attacking them. I do not want them annoyed. I want them dismantled. I want to watch them burn their own facade to the ground. What else is happening in the background? Sylvia's eyes narrowed behind her designer frames. The slight shift in her posture told me we were moving from family drama into dangerous financial territory. She tapped the screen of her tablet, bringing up a highly encrypted dashboard, and slid it across the glass table toward me. This is why I came over personally this morning. 30 minutes ago, our financial monitoring software triggered a massive red alert across your dormant accounts. I leaned forward, studying the complex metrics on the screen. My personal credit file, the one tied to my old middle-class identity before I transferred my actual wealth into corporate trusts, was flashing with multiple hard inquiries. The system was detecting an aggressive series of financial maneuvers that I certainly had not authorized. Someone is trying to pull your credit, Sylvia explained, her tone dropping an octave to convey the absolute gravity of the situation. And not just a standard background check or a credit card application. Someone is attempting to originate a high-yield short-term commercial bridge loan using your social security number as the primary guarantor. I stared at the numbers on the screen, the cold logic of the situation rapidly snapping into focus. My family thought I was completely destitute. They thought I was living on the streets, entirely cut off from the financial world. They assumed I would never have the resources or the legal awareness to monitor a credit profile I supposedly ruined. How much are they trying to pull? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. $500,000, Sylvia said flatly. The air on the terrace suddenly felt very still. $500,000 was not a simple mistake or a petty theft. This was felony-level wire fraud and identity theft on a massive scale. The game had just escalated from petty family gossip into federal crimes. Sylvia tapped the screen of her tablet again, swiping away the financial alerts to bring up a different interface. It was a complex digital matrix her cybersecurity team had built overnight. The screen was populated with interconnected nodes, timestamps, and screenshots of every single text message, voicemail, and social media post my family had blasted out over the last 72 hours. We need to look at this defamation campaign through an entirely different lens, Sylvia said, her voice dropping into the clinical cadence she used during high-stakes corporate litigation. Yesterday I thought your mother and sister were just being vindictive. But looking at the exact timing of this loan application, this smear campaign is not just toxic gossip, it is a highly calculated legal strategy. They are building a preemptive alibi. I stared at the intricate matrix of lies on the glowing screen, rapidly piecing together their twisted logic. They are establishing a motive for the loan, I realized aloud. Exactly. Sylvia nodded sharply. By convincing your entire extended family and Monica's massive online following that you are a desperate addict spiraling out of control. They are laying the absolute groundwork for plausible deniability. When this high-yield commercial loan eventually defaults and the aggressive creditors come looking for the guarantor, Jamal can simply throw his hands up. He will point directly to this exact digital footprint and claim that you must have stolen the money to fund your fabricated addiction. They are not just stealing your identity, Clara. They are actively setting you up to take the fall and face federal prison. The sheer malice of the plan was breathtaking. I looked at a transcribed voicemail from my mother, Diana, to my Aunt Brenda clearly visible on Sylvia's tablet. Diana had specifically used the words erratic, desperate for cash, and capable of anything. She was meticulously planting specific legal keywords. It reminded me of the time I was 24 and trying to secure a lease for my first small apartment. Diana had secretly called the leasing agent and told them I had a history of skipping rent and destroying property purely to force me to stay under her roof and maintain her control. She had weaponized my reputation then to keep me small. Now she was weaponizing it to keep her golden son-in-law out of a federal penitentiary. We are going to map every single piece of this digital footprint, I instructed, my eyes locked on the surveillance screen. I do not want a single tweet, direct message, or deleted comment to slip through the cracks. My team is already scraping the metadata. Sylvia confirmed, pulling up a secondary window that displayed lines of raw code and geolocation tags. Every time Monica posts a tearful update about your supposed downfall, she is stamping it with an IP address and a precise time code. We are logging it all into a secure server using strict blockchain verification so they can never claim the evidence was tampered with later. We are officially treating this as an ongoing criminal conspiracy. I pointed to a dense cluster of nodes linked to Monica's Instagram account. Monica has over 200,000 followers. She is actively using her platform to legitimize the lie. Look at the engagement metrics. She is responding to comments thanking people for their prayers and reiterating that I am financially ruined. Every one of those public replies is another separate count of libel, but more importantly, it proves she is actively maintaining the false narrative to support Jamal's financial fraud. Sylvia typed a quick note into her stylus interface. Under 18 U.S. Code Section 1343, wire fraud carries a penalty of up to 20 years in federal prison. But because they are operating across state lines using digital communications to advance a fraudulent scheme, we can also explore charges under the Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act, if we can prove they are acting as a coordinated enterprise. Your parents spreading the lies provides the necessary cover. Monica provides the public validation, and Jamal executes the financial theft. It is a textbook criminal syndicate operating right out of a Connecticut suburb. The emotional noise that usually accompanies family betrayal was completely absent from my mind. I did not feel the urge to cry, scream, or demand answers. I felt exactly like a seasoned surgeon holding a sharp scalpel examining a malignant tumor that needed to be systematically excised. My family had completely underestimated who they were dealing with. They still saw me as the submissive scapegoat they had bullied for decades, entirely oblivious to the fact that I spent my days negotiating ruthless intellectual property disputes with massive multinational conglomerates. Do not send any cease and desist letters, I told Sylvia, my voice firm and unwavering. If we threaten them with legal action right now, they will panic, delete their posts, and scurry back into the shadows. I want them feeling confident. I want them to believe they have won. Let Diana keep calling the relatives. Let Monica keep posting her pathetic selfies. Give them enough rope to hang themselves completely. Sylvia smiled, a genuine expression of professional respect. We gather the rope, she agreed. We let them build a mountain of undeniable evidence. The more they talk, the more concrete their conspiracy becomes. I have instructed the cyber team to monitor their digital activity around the clock. We will know every time they make a move. I looked out over the terrace edge, watching the tiny yellow taxicabs navigating the busy streets of Lower Manhattan far below. My family had engineered a masterclass in psychological warfare, completely unaware that I had the capital, the legal firepower, and the absolute ruthlessness to turn their trap into their own prison. They wanted to strip me of my dignity and my freedom just to save a fraudulent investment broker. They had finally crossed the point of no return. Keep mapping the defamation, I said, turning my back on the skyline to face Sylvia. I want a flawless, irrefutable timeline that connects every single lie they tell directly to Jamal's loan application. We are not just going to prove they are liars. We are going to prove they are felons. The words had barely left my mouth when a sharp, piercing alarm erupted from Sylvia's tablet. The sound shattered the quiet morning atmosphere of my terrace. It was not a standard email notification or a simple calendar reminder. It was a harsh, grating siren designed specifically by our cybersecurity team to signify a catastrophic breach in progress. Sylvia snatched the device from the glass table, her fingers flying across the encrypted screen with practiced speed. Her jaw tightened as she absorbed the incoming data. The application just moved from pending to active underwriting, Sylvia announced, turning the screen toward me. They just initiated a hard credit inquiry. I watched in real time as the digital dashboard updated. My legacy credit score, the profile attached to my original middle-class identity, plummeted by 120 points in a matter of seconds. The visual representation of the drop flashed in bright, angry red across the display. Jamal was not just submitting a casual inquiry, he was aggressively pushing this $500,000 loan through a predatory lending network that specialized in fast, high-interest approvals. This lender operates completely outside standard banking regulations, Sylvia explained, pointing to the Delaware-based firm flashing on the screen. They do not require in-person verification. They rely entirely on digital document submission and automated underwriting algorithms. Jamal selected a shadow lender that prioritizes speed over diligent verification because he needs this cash injection before federal auditors knock on his brokerage firm doors. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the granular details of the data packet our software had intercepted. I want to see exactly what he submitted under my name. Sylvia tapped a command bypassing the lender's encryption to mirror the exact file Jamal had uploaded. A massive PDF document materialized on the tablet. It was a masterclass in financial fabrication. The first page displayed a digital copy of a driver's license. It had my correct full name, my correct birth date, and my exact social security number. But the address listed was a rundown apartment complex in a completely different borough, and the photograph was a slightly blurred, heavily edited image pulled from an old social media account. "He manufactured a comprehensive alternate identity for you," Sylvia observed coldly. I scrolled down, feeling a surge of icy adrenaline. Here were 3 years of forged tax returns. Jamal had painstakingly created fraudulent forms indicating I was employed as a mid-level manager at a failing logistics company, earning just enough to justify the loan request, but looking sufficiently desperate to accept a predatory interest rate. The irony was staggering. My brother-in-law, the man who had just tossed a $200 bill at my feet and mocked me for being a useless failure, had spent hours sitting at his expensive mahogany desk, fabricating tax returns to make me look like a struggling corporate drone. How did he get my exact social security number, I asked. I scrubbed my public records when I launched my biolab. Sylvia pulled up a cross-referenced file. Look at the metadata on these scanned tax documents. The original scan was generated by the exact printer model your father keeps in his home office in Connecticut. A sharp, vivid memory cut through my mind. I was 20 years old, standing in the cramped hallway of my childhood home, packing my bags to return to college. My mother, Diana, had cornered me by the door, demanding I hand over my social security card and original birth certificate. She claimed it was for vital insurance purposes, and that I was far too irresponsible to hold on to such important documents myself. In reality, it was just another mechanism of control, a way to ensure I always had to ask her permission to execute any major life decision. She had kept those documents locked in my father's heavy steel filing cabinet for over a decade. And now she had willingly handed them over to her golden son-in-law to facilitate a federal crime. Diana and Richard literally handed him the keys to your financial ruin, Sylvia stated. They knew he was applying for this loan. They provided the foundational documents to make it happen. They are acting as eager accomplices in your destruction just to protect Monica's lavish lifestyle and Jamal's failing career. I continued scrolling through the intercepted application package until I reached the final page. It was the payout directive. This was the exact destination where the $500,000 would be wired upon approval. It was not routed to Jamal's personal bank account. Instead, the wire transfer was directed to a corporate shell entity registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Apex Holdings Group. He is laundering the money offshore. First, I deduced analyzing the routing numbers. He intends to bounce the $500,000 through the Caymans, wash it clean of its origins, and then quietly repatriate the funds into his brokerage firm to cover his disastrous margin calls. By the time this shady Delaware lender realizes the loan has defaulted and comes looking for the guarantor named Clara, the money will be completely untraceable, and I will be the one facing criminal investigators. It is an airtight strategy. Sylvia admitted, her professional admiration entirely overshadowed by her disgust. If you were truly the helpless bankrupt dropout they believe you to be, this would ruin your life permanently. The forged tax returns and the carefully orchestrated social media smear campaign painting you as a desperate addict would be more than enough to convince a jury that you stole the money and blew it all. Jamal would walk away completely unscathed, playing the role of the successful broker while you took the fall. I set the tablet down on the glass table. The morning sun was fully illuminating the Manhattan skyline, now casting long, sharp shadows across the terrace. My family had engineered a flawless execution of financial assassination. They had planned for every single contingency except one. They had no idea they were attempting to scam a woman who employed a legal and cybersecurity team more ruthless than any federal agency. Do not interfere with the underwriting process, I instructed Sylvia, my voice echoing with absolute finality. Let the conditional approval process go through completely. I want Jamal to receive that notification. I want him to taste the relief. I want him to believe he has successfully saved his empire by destroying my life. We will lock the iron cage only when he is completely inside it. Sylvia gave a curt nod of agreement, her eyes gleaming with the shared understanding of our ruthless strategy. She closed the encrypted file on her tablet and stood up, smoothing the front of her sharp blazer. We left the sunlit terrace and moved straight into my private home office. It was a sterile, soundproofed room, equipped with a multi-monitor command center that connected directly to my company's intelligence division. I did not just manufacture luxury cosmetic formulas. My business relied heavily on proprietary biochemical patents, which meant my corporate espionage defenses were military grade. My brother-in-law was bringing a pocket knife to a drone fight. I sat at my sleek, minimalist desk and activated the primary display. Connect me to Leo, I instructed. Sylvia authenticated her legal credentials on the secondary terminal. Within seconds, the face of my lead cybersecurity director appeared on the central monitor. Leo was operating out of our secure server farm in upstate New York. He looked exhausted, but practically vibrating with caffeinated energy. He had been monitoring the network traffic since the first red alert triggered earlier that morning. I have the entire digital trail isolated, Clara, Leo announced without preamble. Jamal thought he was being incredibly clever. He routed the loan application through a commercial proxy server in Amsterdam and bounced it back through a residential IP in Texas to mask his physical location. But he made a fundamental amateur error. He did not spoof his machine's physical hardware address. Leo tapped his keyboard, and a cascading waterfall of code filled the screen, highlighting a specific string of alphanumeric characters in bright green. This is the media access control address, Leo explained, his voice steady and analytical. Every device connected to a network has a unique, unchangeable hardware fingerprint. Jamal used his encrypted work laptop to submit the fraudulent application. That specific laptop is registered to the internal network of Vanguard Apex Investments. I tracked the handshake protocol directly back to their main server hub located in the financial district. I have also verified the chain of custody for this data block. It is already logged into our immutable server, making it fully admissible in federal court. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool glass of my desk. So we can prove without a shadow of a doubt that the application originated from inside his brokerage firm. We can do much better than that, Leo said, a fierce grin breaking across his face. I ran a cross-reference on the network logs. I isolated the exact user credentials that authorized the outbound traffic through Vanguard's corporate firewall at the exact second the loan application was submitted. The login ID belongs exclusively to Jamal. We have him digitally holding the smoking gun. He literally committed wire fraud from his corner office using company bandwidth. Sylvia steepled her fingers, her legal mind processing the devastating implications. This elevates the situation tremendously. By utilizing his firm's network infrastructure to execute a felony, Jamal has effectively exposed his entire brokerage to federal liability. The Securities and Exchange Commission will dismantle his company brick by brick when they find out a senior broker is running identity theft rings from his work terminal. The compliance officers at Vanguard will turn on him instantly to save themselves, but the technological incompetence did not stop there. Leo pulled up a secondary routing map on the screen. It showed a direct peer-to-peer file transfer occurring 24 hours before the loan application was submitted. I wanted to know how he got your high-resolution birth certificate and social security card. Leo continued, pointing to a glowing red node on the map. So I worked backward from the file upload. The original PDF packet was not created on Jamal's computer. It was transferred to him via a direct secure link. I traced the origin of that transfer. It came from a residential IP address in Connecticut, specifically an IP address registered to your father, Richard. The room fell perfectly silent. I stared at the data on the screen, the irrefutable digital proof of my own father's treachery. My mind flashed back to the countless times Richard had lectured me about integrity, about the family honor, about the absolute necessity of maintaining a pristine reputation. He had weaponized those lectures to make me feel inadequate. Yet here he was, sitting in his expensive leather chair in his immaculate suburban study, deliberately scanning my most sensitive personal documents and transmitting them to a desperate fraudster. Richard actively compiled the forgery packet, Sylvia stated, her tone turning glacial. He did not just turn a blind eye, he gathered the ammunition, loaded the weapon, and handed it directly to Jamal. It was the ultimate manifestation of the golden child dynamic. Monica was the chosen daughter, the extension of their vanity. Jamal, by extension, was the golden son-in-law, the man who provided the wealthy facade they so desperately craved. To protect that facade, they were willing to sacrifice the scapegoat. I was not a daughter to them. I was simply a disposable asset, an unused credit profile they could harvest for spare parts to fix Jamal's sinking ship. The sheer emotional detachment required for a father to facilitate the financial destruction of his own child was staggering. They colluded, I said, my voice perfectly devoid of a single tremor. Richard provided the identity. Diana is providing the public smear campaign to create the alibi. Monica is generating the social media validation. Jamal is executing the financial theft. They built a highly organized criminal enterprise just to maintain their country club memberships. Leo brought up another set of complex documents on the screen. There is one more thing you need to see, Clara. While I was digging around inside Vanguard's public filing servers, I noticed something highly irregular about Jamal's recent trading history. I decided to run a deep diagnostic on his public asset disclosures. Sylvia leaned in closer to the monitor, her eyes scanning the complex financial ledgers Leo was presenting. Jamal is not just dealing with a standard market downturn, she murmured, reading the cascading figures. This is a catastrophic liquidity crisis. I want to see the exact depth of his failure. I ordered, my gaze locked on the flashing red numbers. Pull up every single margin call, every over-leveraged asset, and every toxic derivative he has touched in the last 12 months. If my family is willing to risk federal prison to bail him out, I need to know exactly how deep his grave is. Leo nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard once more. Initiating the financial sweep now. You are going to want to sit back for this, Clara. He is hiding a financial black hole. The screen transitioned from the complex routing maps to a stark, overwhelming grid of financial ledgers. Red numbers cascaded down the monitors, reflecting a catastrophic series of financial choices. Leo brought up the central dashboard, expanding a cluster of offshore shell companies and hidden margin accounts that Jamal had desperately tried to conceal from his own compliance department. Look at the timeline, Leo instructed, highlighting a specific column from 6 months ago. Jamal initiated a massive position in highly volatile cryptocurrency derivatives. He did not just use his own capital, He illegally leveraged funds directly from his most prominent clients. When the market shifted unexpectedly last quarter, his entire portfolio imploded. He was hit with a cascade of margin calls that he fundamentally could not cover. I scrutinized the staggering figures flashing across the glass display. The deficit was absolutely breathtaking. He is down nearly $4 million. I observed, my voice remaining completely detached. How has Vanguard Apex Investments not flagged this catastrophic loss and fired him immediately? Because he has been shuffling the debt through a labyrinth of shadow accounts to artificially inflate his balance sheet, Sylvia explained, leaning over the desk to examine the data. He is essentially running a micro Ponzi scheme within his own brokerage firm. He borrows from one client ledger to temporarily patch the bleeding in another right before the monthly compliance checks occur. But that kind of financial juggling act is mathematically unsustainable. It requires a constant influx of fresh capital just to maintain the illusion of solvency. Leo tapped his keyboard, bringing up a secondary window that displayed an impending schedule of corporate audits. Vanguard is launching an aggressive third-party forensic audit in exactly 12 days, he stated. They brought in external auditors because of recent market volatility. When those auditors look under the hood of Jamal's specific portfolio, they will instantly discover the missing $4 million. The sheer scale of the embezzlement will trigger an immediate federal investigation. Jamal is not just facing termination. He is staring down the barrel of a decade in federal prison for securities fraud and grand larceny. The pieces of the puzzle slam together with sickening clarity. The $500,000 commercial bridge loan he was attempting to secure under my name was not meant to solve his entire crisis. It was a desperate stopgap measure. He needs the $500,000 to pass the imminent audit, I reasoned, piecing together his frantic strategy. If he injects $500,000 into the most critically depleted client accounts before the auditors arrive next week, he can temporarily balance the books and survive the inspection. It buys him another month to try and gamble his way out of the remaining debt or secure a longer-term escape plan. Sylvia nodded, her eyes dark with absolute disgust. Exactly. But he could not secure a legitimate loan because his personal credit is likely maxed out from trying to cover his initial losses. He needed a clean, untethered identity with no current financial footprint. Your identity, Clara. But taking out a fraudulent loan is an incredibly high-risk felony. He needed an ironclad scapegoat to absorb the fallout when the Delaware lender inevitably realizes they have been scammed and demands their money back. I turned to look at Sylvia, the chilling reality of their coordinated smear campaign, finally revealing its true purpose. That is why Diana and Richard are calling every single relative and telling them I am a desperate addict. That is why Monica is posting those pathetic, tearful statements online. Yes, Sylvia confirmed. When the commercial loan defaults in a few weeks and the investigators trace the application back to Jamal's office, he already has his defense completely prepared. He will claim that his estranged drug-addicted sister-in-law broke into his home, stole his secure work laptop, and submitted the loan application herself to feed her raging habits. He will argue that he was simply a victim of identity theft committed by a desperate relative. Your parents and your sister will eagerly testify under oath to your supposed erratic behavior, your demands for cash, and your moral decay. They will present the fabricated tax returns and the stolen Social Security card as proof of your elaborate deception. They were not simply trying to steal $500,000 from me. They were actively constructing a meticulous legal narrative designed to frame me for a federal crime. They intended to send me to a penitentiary to ensure their golden son-in-law could continue masquerading as a successful Wall Street elite. My parents were willing to sacrifice my freedom, my future, and my entire life just to avoid the profound social embarrassment of admitting their perfect daughter had married a catastrophic fraud. The level of depravity required to execute such a plan was staggering. I had spent my entire childhood trying to earn their basic affection, believing that if I just achieved enough, they would finally see my worth. I had internalized their constant criticism, genuinely believing I was inherently flawed, while they placed Monica and Jamal on an unreachable pedestal of perfection. Yet here was the absolute truth, laid bare in glowing lines of code and financial records. The golden child was entirely dependent on a criminal, and my parents were active conspirators in a felony. I did not feel an ounce of sorrow. The final lingering threads of familial obligation evaporated completely, leaving behind a profound sense of liberation. They had unknowingly handed me the exact weapon required to dismantle their entire existence. "Leo," I said, breaking the brief silence in the room. "This financial data gives us the motive and the mechanism of the crime. But to ensure the federal prosecutors have an absolutely airtight case under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act 1, need irrefutable audio proof of their collusion. I need to hear them actively discussing the conspiracy." Leo tilted his head, a professional curiosity lighting up his exhausted features. "How do you propose we get audio surveillance inside a secure Connecticut estate without physically planting listening devices?" I smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that caused Sylvia to mirror the look instantly. 5 years ago, when I was desperately trying to prove my worth to my father, I personally upgraded their entire home security system, I explained. I installed top-of-the-line smart cameras with integrated two-way audio feeds in the main living areas and his private study. Richard is notoriously terrible with technology. He refused to learn how to manage the administrative dashboard, so he forced me to remain the primary network administrator. Leo's hands were already hovering over his keyboard. "Are you telling me you still have master administrative access to the security cameras inside their house?" I pulled my personal laptop toward me and opened a hidden encrypted directory. "I never deleted my administrative credentials. They think I am a useless dropout who cannot even afford an apartment. They have absolutely no idea I still hold the digital keys to their fortress. Let us see what they are discussing in the dark." My fingers danced across the keyboard of my personal laptop. I navigated through a series of encrypted firewalls, inputting the archaic IP address of my parents' Connecticut estate. 5 years ago, I had spent an entire weekend wiring that house, carefully positioning high-definition lenses in the corners of the crown molding. I had done it as a desperate plea for my father's validation, hoping my technical skills would finally earn a nod of approval. Instead, Richard had simply complained about the dust I left on his baseboards. Now that unappreciated labor was about to serve as the prosecution's primary exhibit, Leo watched my screen share with professional intensity from his remote location as I bypassed the initial security gateway. The system prompted for a master password. I typed in the exact phrase my mother used for everything, a deeply narcissistic combination of her own name and her birth year. The interface unlocked instantly. A grid of 16 black squares materialized on my monitor. One by one, the camera feeds snapped to life, illuminating the pristine, sterile rooms of my childhood prison. The grand foyer was empty. The expansive marble kitchen where Diana routinely criticized my eating habits was completely dark. I clicked through the exterior feeds, noting Jamal's ostentatious luxury SUV parked haphazardly in the driveway, a clear sign of his unraveling mental state. Finally, I toggled the feed for the mahogany-lined study. The screen flickered, adjusting to the dim ambient lighting, and there they were, the entire syndicate gathered together in a single room. Richard was standing by his vintage globe bar, pouring a generous measure of scotch. He looked remarkably relaxed for a man actively facilitating a federal crime. Diana sat perched on the edge of a leather wingback chair, her posture rigidly perfect as she scrolled rapidly through her phone. Monica was pacing the length of the expensive Persian rug, while Jamal sat slumped on the sofa, his head buried in his hands. The audio feed initialized with a faint static hiss before clearing into crisp, unmistakable high-fidelity sound. I turned up the volume on my desk speakers. Sylvia leaned in her legal notepad ready. Jamal's voice broke the heavy silence in the study, thick with barely concealed panic. "Are you absolutely certain the Delaware lender does not require voice verification?" Jamal asked, his leg bouncing nervously against the coffee table. "If they trigger a manual review and try to call the guarantor number we provided, this whole thing collapses. The auditors are coming next Thursday. If this $500,000 does not hit my Cayman Shell account by Monday, Vanguard is going to realize the money is gone. I will be ruined." Richard walked over and handed Jamal the glass of scotch. Calm down, Jamal. You are sweating like a common criminal. My father chastised his tone, dripping with arrogant condescension. You are a part of this family now. We do not panic over administrative details. The digital application was flawless. I gave you her original Social Security card and the pristine birth certificate. They have no reason to flag it. I watched the screen, my chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. Hearing him admit it out loud in his own distinct voice stripped away the final microscopic illusion that he possessed a shred of paternal instinct. He was not just an accomplice. He was the architect of my destruction. But what if she checks her credit? Jamal pressed, taking a desperate gulp of the liquor. What if Clara gets a fraud alert? Diana let out a sharp, mocking laugh without even looking up from her phone screen. Clara checking her credit? My mother scoffed. Please, Jamal. Be realistic. The girl is a complete disaster. She just closed that humiliating little soap shop she was running. She is likely living out of her car or begging her low-class friends for couch space right now. People like Clara do not monitor their financial portfolios because they do not have any finances to monitor. The sheer absolute conviction in her voice was staggering. I remembered being 27, quietly paying off the severe medical debt my parents had explicitly refused to cover when I was hospitalized for exhaustion. They had claimed my physical breakdown was an embarrassing lack of resilience, leaving me to handle the crushing financial burden completely alone. They had always operated on the assumption that I was fundamentally incapable of managing my own life. That arrogant assumption was now the fatal flaw in their criminal enterprise. Monica stopped pacing and turned toward her husband. Mom is right, babe, my sister chimed in, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. Besides, even if Clara miraculously figures it out and tries to go to the police, who is going to believe her? I have spent the last 3 days telling my entire audience that she is having a massive psychiatric episode fueled by substance abuse. Aunt Brenda has already told half the country club that Clara showed up here threatening us for drug money. We have established the narrative perfectly. If she claims identity theft, the authorities will just assume she took out the loan herself, blew the cash on a bender, and is lying to cover her tracks. Sylvia let out a slow, quiet breath beside me. They are explicitly confirming the premeditated nature of the smear campaign, she whispered. This proves malicious intent to defraud and frame. It is textbook racketeering. On the screen, Jamal rubbed his temples, the heavy gold watch on his wrist catching the dim light of the study. It is just risky, he muttered. If they trace the IP address back to my office at Vanguard. You used the proxy servers exactly as you were supposed to. Richard interrupted sharply, his patience clearly wearing thin. You are overthinking this. I did not give you my daughter's identity so you could sit here and hyperventilate on my furniture. You needed capital to fix your ridiculous trading errors, and I provided the perfect untraceable collateral. Clara's entire existence has been a worthless disappointment to this family. The absolute least she can do is provide a clean Social Security number to keep my son-in-law out of federal prison and protect our family's reputation from a public scandal. I stared at the pixelated image of my father. He had just concisely summarized my entire value in his eyes. I was not a human being to him. I was an expendable asset, a sacrificial lamb to be slaughtered on the altar of their country club prestige. Leo's voice crackled softly through my headset. I am capturing the audio stream directly to the secure server, Clara. The audio clarity is pristine. We have their voice prints definitively matched to the timeline of the loan submission. This is ironclad. I did not look away from the monitor. Diana finally locked her phone and looked directly at Jamal. The loan will clear by Monday, she said with chilling certainty. You will balance your books, the auditors will find nothing, and we will never have to speak of Clara again. She is a ghost, Jamal. Let her take the fall. It is exactly what she deserves for being such an embarrassment to us all. The screen flared back to life. The camera angle remained the same, capturing the mahogany study, but the atmosphere was completely different. The polished arrogance they had displayed during dinner was entirely gone. Jamal was pacing frantically behind the leather sofa, his designer tie discarded on the floor. Monica was curled in an armchair, her face buried in her hands. "I am dead, Richard." Jamal hyperventilated, his voice echoing loudly in the silent surveillance room. The Vanguard compliance team pushed the audit timeline up. They are bringing in external forensic accountants next Thursday. When they check the derivative ledgers, they will see the $4 million deficit. I cannot hide it anymore. I am going to federal prison. On the screen, Richard stood by the window, his posture rigid with fury. "You arrogant fool," my father spat out the words like venom. "I vouched for you. I introduced you to my partners at the club. If you go down for securities fraud, you drag the Blackwell reputation down with you. We will be laughing stocks." Monica looked up, her perfectly contoured face streaked with mascara. "Daddy, please," she whimpered, deploying her ultimate weapon of weaponized helplessness. "You have to save us. If Jamal goes to prison, I lose everything. The house, the cars, my brand. You cannot let them take my life away." I watched the screen with clinical detachment. Here was the core dynamic of my childhood playing out in high definition. Monica faced a consequence, and instead of taking accountability, she immediately demanded a rescue. And right on cue, Diana stepped into the frame to provide the solution. My mother walked over to the heavy steel filing cabinet in the corner of the study. She pulled a brass key from her pocket, unlocked the top drawer, and extracted a faded manila folder. I recognized that folder instantly. It was the same one she had used to confiscate my financial documents when I was 19, claiming I lacked the mental capacity to manage a basic checking account. She had used that excuse to monitor every penny I earned from my college jobs. Diana walked across the Persian rug and slammed the folder down on the coffee table right in front of Jamal. "She is a worthless failure anyway," Diana stated, her voice devoid of a single ounce of maternal instinct. "Use Clara." Jamal stopped pacing. He stared at the folder, his chest heaving. "What are you talking about?" "Open it," Richard commanded, catching on to his wife's strategy immediately. My father stepped away from the window and approached the coffee table. Inside that folder is Clara's original Social Security card, her birth certificate, and copies of her old W-2 forms. She just closed her pathetic little retail shop. She has absolutely zero assets, zero credibility, and zero future. She is a ghost. "You want me to steal her identity?" Jamal asked, his voice dropping to an anxious whisper. "I want you to survive," Richard corrected sharply. "You are an investment broker. You know how the shadow lending markets work. Take these documents. Fabricate whatever income verification you need. Apply for a high-yield commercial bridge loan using her identity as the primary guarantor. Secure $500,000 to inject into your Vanguard accounts before the auditors arrive." "But what happens when the loan defaults?" Jamal asked, picking up my Social Security card with trembling fingers. "They will come looking for the guarantor. They will investigate." "Let them investigate," Diana interjected smoothly. "Clara just stood in our dining room and demanded a handout. She is clearly unstable. Tomorrow morning I will begin calling Brenda and the rest of the extended family. I will tell them Clara showed up here in a drug-induced mania. We will build an impenetrable wall of character evidence against her. When the authorities come knocking about a fraudulent commercial loan, they will find a trail of evidence pointing to a desperate woman who stole money to fund her habits." I sat perfectly still in my office chair. I was watching my own parents meticulously construct a federal trap designed to lock me in a cage. There was no hesitation. There was no moral conflict. To them, my life was merely a bargaining chip, a disposable commodity to be traded in exchange for their country club status. "You take the money," Richard instructed his son-in-law, jabbing a finger toward the documents. "You balance your books. You pass the audit. If the fallout hits, it hits Clara. It is exactly what she deserves for being such a massive disappointment to this family. Consider it her final contribution to our legacy." The video feed ended, leaving the frame frozen on Jamal, stuffing my identity documents into his expensive suit jacket. Sylvia exhaled a long, slow breath, breaking the silence in my office. She adjusted her designer frames, her legal mind racing through the implications of what we had just witnessed. "That is the smoking gun, Clara. We do not just have circumstantial evidence of identity theft. We have a high-definition audio and visual recording of a criminal conspiracy being formed. We have Richard explicitly outlining the wire fraud. We have Diana explicitly outlining the premeditated defamation campaign to obstruct justice. And we have Jamal taking possession of the stolen documents. Leo spoke up through the headset, his voice laced with professional awe. It is a prosecutor's absolute dream. They did not just cross a legal line, they sprinted past it while filming themselves. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the frozen image of my father. For 33 years, I had analyzed every interaction, wondering why I was never enough. I had spent countless nights tearing myself apart, trying to find the fundamental flaw within me that made my parents treat me with such casual cruelty. Seeing this footage provided the ultimate closure. I was not flawed. I was simply dealing with clinical sociopaths who viewed human beings as tools. We have the motive, the method, and the admission of guilt. I said, my voice cutting through the room with razor-sharp precision. They have built their entire lives around maintaining an illusion of superiority and wealth. They look down on everyone who does not meet their arbitrary standards of success. I pulled a sleek titanium pen from my desk organizer and tapped it rhythmically against the glass surface. I am not going to hand this footage over to the police just yet. If we arrest them now, they will hire expensive defense attorneys, drag the proceedings through the courts for years, and quietly plead down to white-collar probation. They will spin the story to their country club friends and claim they were unjustly targeted. Sylvia leaned forward, understanding dawning in her sharp eyes. You want a public execution. I want absolute total destruction. I confirmed my gaze, locking with my attorney. Jamal thinks he has bought himself time to find a mysterious angel investor to save his sinking firm. Richard and Diana think they have successfully dumped the consequences of this disaster onto my shoulders. We are going to let them walk right up to the finish line. We are going to let them step into the most public, prestigious arena they can find, and then we are going to drop the floor out from under them. I turned back to the secondary monitor, bringing up my corporate calendar. The Global Innovation Investment Gala is exactly 1 week from today. I am scheduled to be the keynote speaker and the primary angel investor for the evening. A lethal smile crossed Sylvia's face. And Jamal has been desperately trying to secure a ticket to that exact gala to find a savior for Vanguard Apex Investments. Exactly, I nodded. Let us make sure my family gets a VIP invitation. It is time they finally met the real Clara. I instructed Sylvia to draft the anonymous VIP invitations through a dummy corporation, ensuring my name remained completely untraceable. As she opened her briefcase to pull out the necessary non-disclosure agreements for the upcoming gala, a specific legal document caught my eye. It was a standard trust fund transfer protocol printed on heavy cream paper. The sight of that specific legal formatting hit me with the force of a physical blow. The clinical scent of my office faded, replaced instantly by the suffocating smell of stale cigar smoke and expensive leather. I was transported 11 years into the past. I was 22 years old, sitting in that exact same mahogany study in Connecticut. I had just been discharged from the hospital after a severe physical and mental breakdown. Working 3 jobs while carrying a full course load had literally caused my body to give out. My parents had refused to pay a single cent of the emergency medical bills, claiming my exhaustion was simply a manifestation of my lazy character. I remembered shivering in the oversized armchair, my hands trembling from the lingering effects of the medication. Richard stood over me, towering and intimidating, while Diana sat adjacent to the desk, sliding a thick stack of legal documents toward me. It was the release paperwork for the irrevocable trust fund my maternal grandmother had left specifically for my future. It was not a fortune, perhaps $80,000, but to a 22-year-old drowning in medical debt, it was a lifeline. Sign the papers, Clara, Richard had demanded, tapping a heavy gold pen against the designated signature line. You are clearly not in your right mind. You just spent 4 days in a psychiatric ward because you could not handle the basic stress of community college. You are entirely unfit to manage this kind of capital. I had tried to protest. I had tried to explain that I needed the money to pay the hospital to secure a cheap apartment to finally gain some independence. But Diana had immediately launched into her practiced psychological warfare. "Listen to yourself," my mother had sneered, her eyes raking over my pale, exhausted face. "You are erratic and irresponsible. If we let you keep this money, you will blow it on useless medical treatments and foolish art projects. Your sister Monica actually has a future. She is launching her lifestyle brand. She needs this capital as seed money to establish her business. It is the only logical choice for the family." Monica had been standing by the doorway texting on her brand new smartphone, utterly unbothered by the fact that she was actively robbing her sick sister. She had just booked a first-class flight to Milan, under the guise of finding inspiration for her brand. My medical debt meant absolutely nothing compared to her desire for an authentic Italian vacation. They kept me in that study for 4 hours. They tag-teamed the psychological abuse, breaking down my defenses, picking apart every mistake I had ever made since childhood, and convincing me that I was a fundamental burden to their existence. They promised that if I signed the money over to Monica, they would help me negotiate my hospital bills. It was a lie, of course. The moment my signature hit the paper transferring my only financial safety net to my sister, they kicked me out of the house. I spent the next 5 years digging myself out of that financial grave while Monica posted photos of herself drinking champagne on yachts entirely funded by my stolen inheritance. Clara Sylvia's voice cut through the memory, snapping me back to the present. I blinked, the sterile, modern lighting of my Manhattan office coming back into sharp focus. Sylvia was watching me carefully, her pen hovering over her legal pad. "Are you all right?" I looked down at my hands. They were not trembling anymore. They were steady, manicured, and resting on a desk worth more than my parents' entire investment portfolio. "I am perfectly fine," I said, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. I was just remembering the last time my family presented me with a legal document. They convinced me I was too weak to survive on my own. They weaponized my exhaustion to steal my grandmother's trust fund for Monica's European vacations. Sylvia's expression hardened. It was a recurring theme with my legal team. Every time we uncovered a new layer of my family's depravity, their professional resolve to destroy them grew stronger. "They stole your foundation to build her facade," Sylvia noted astutely. "And now Jamal is trying to steal my identity to save that exact same facade," I replied. The symmetry of their abuse is almost poetic. 11 years ago, they held me hostage in a room and forced me to sign away my future. Next week, I am going to lock them in a ballroom and force them to sign away their freedom. I turned my attention back to the gala preparations. The Global Innovation Investment Gala was the premier networking event for Wall Street's desperate and elite. Tickets were impossible to procure unless you were managing assets north of $50 million. Jamal, with his failing brokerage firm and massive margin calls, would literally sell his soul to get inside that room. He needed access to high-net-worth individuals who could be manipulated into injecting capital into Vanguard Apex investments. "We need the bait to look irresistible," I instructed Sylvia. "Create a ghost investor profile, draft an email from a fictitious Swiss asset management firm, send it directly to Jamal's encrypted work email. Tell him that a highly private angel investor has been quietly monitoring his firm's portfolio and is interested in discussing a $10 million capital injection to capitalize on current market volatility." Leo routed the VIP passes. The trap was securely set. My family thought they were hunting. They had no idea they were walking into their own execution. Let the absolute destruction begin. I turned back to the main monitor where the red alerts from the Delaware lender were still pulsing steadily. The $500,000 loan application was currently sitting in the final underwriting stage. Jamal was inches away from securing the fraudulent funds. "We need to control the payout," I said, pointing to the routing destination on the screen. "If that wire transfer actually hits his Cayman Island shell company, recovering the capital becomes an international jurisdictional nightmare. But if we cancel the application right now, he knows he is caught. He will immediately scrub his Vanguard servers and shred the hard copies of my identity documents at my parents' house." Sylvia nodded, pulling up a direct secure portal to her banking contacts. "We do not cancel it, we quarantine it. I have a contact at the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network who owes me a considerable favor. We can establish a silent digital sandbox around this specific transaction. Explain the mechanics, I demanded, needing the legal architecture to be flawless. The Delaware lender uses an automated clearinghouse to disperse funds. Sylvia elaborated, her fingers flying across her keyboard. We intercept the final approval code. The system will send Jamal a completely legitimate-looking notification stating the loan is approved and the funds have been successfully wired to his offshore account. His internal dashboard at Vanguard will reflect the inbound capital. He will think he has won. And the actual money? I asked. The actual $500,000 will be seamlessly diverted into an escrow account controlled strictly by my law firm. Sylvia smiled, a tight, vicious expression. The money never leaves the country. It sits in a legal purgatory. But because Jamal digitally signs the final promissory note and accepts the transfer, the felony wire fraud is officially executed. The crime is complete the exact second he clicks accept. We will have him trapped in a closed loop. I looked at Leo on the screen. Can you intercept the lender's notification system without triggering their internal security protocols? Already bypassing their firewall. Leo responded, the rapid clacking of his mechanical keyboard filling the room. These subprime lenders invest heavily in aggressive marketing, but severely neglect their back-end cybersecurity. I am mirroring their outbound email server now. When the underwriter approves the loan tomorrow morning, I will capture the actual wire transfer and route it to Sylvia's escrow. Simultaneously, I will push a cloned confirmation receipt directly to Jamal's encrypted inbox. He will see the exact digital signature he is desperately waiting for. Perfect, I said, feeling the final pieces of the iron cage snapping together. He needs to walk into that gala next week completely stripped of his paranoia. He needs to believe he has temporarily patched the $4 million hole in his portfolio. Arrogance is a sedative. I want him relaxed, confident, and utterly oblivious. Sylvia closed her encrypted folder and placed her hands flat on the glass desk. What about the police, Clara? We have more than enough evidence to bring in federal investigators right now. We have the audio of Richard and Diana orchestrating the theft. We have the IP trace. We could have them all arrested before dinner. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the sprawling metropolis below. The temptation to end it immediately was strong, but it lacked the absolute devastation they deserved. If we call the authorities today, my parents will instantly hire the best defense attorneys in Connecticut. I explained, my voice echoing with cold precision. They will spin a narrative of confusion. They will claim Jamal acted alone and manipulated them. Diana will play the victim, crying to the press that her successful son-in-law took advantage of her trusting nature. Richard will leverage his old banking connections to quietly sweep his involvement under the rug. They will survive. I turned to face my lawyer. I do not want them to survive this. I want them publicly dismantled in front of the exact high society audience they value more than their own daughter's life. When the police arrest them, it will not be in the privacy of their suburban estate. It will be in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, wearing rented tuxedos surrounded by the wealthiest investors in the country. Sylvia's eyes gleamed with deep professional respect. You are turning their insatiable greed into the murder weapon. I am simply giving them exactly what they asked for, I replied. They wanted to use my name to secure their status. Now my name is going to be the last thing they hear before they lose everything. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was another Google alert I had set up for my sister's social media handles. I tapped the screen. Monica had just uploaded a new video. She was sitting in her lavish kitchen wearing minimal makeup to feign distress, speaking tearfully into the camera about the pain of loving someone who refuses to get clean. She was actively cementing the smear campaign, laying the final bricks of the alibi she thought would protect her husband. Leo, I said, not taking my eyes off Monica's fake tears. Are the VIP invitations ready? Printed on heavy cardstock with gold foil lettering. Leo confirmed. I used a courier service paid entirely in cash. The envelopes are scheduled to be hand-delivered to your parents' estate tomorrow at exactly noon. I ensured the sender is listed as the Apex Innovation Board. It sounds prestigious, exclusive, and vaguely tied to Jamal's industry. They will not question it. They will just see an opportunity to network with billionaires. Ensure the courier demands a direct signature from Richard, I instructed. I want digital confirmation the moment those tickets are in his hands. The trap was completely secure. The financial fraud was locked in a digital sandbox. The defamation was meticulously archived on an immutable server, and the bait for the final confrontation was currently en route to Connecticut. For 33 years, my family had operated under the absolute certainty that they could treat me like disposable garbage without ever facing a single consequence. They had broken my spirit when I was young, stolen my inheritance when I was vulnerable, and were now attempting to steal my identity to save a criminal. I sat back down at my desk and opened the architectural floor plans for the Plaza Hotel ballroom. I needed to study the layout. I needed to know exactly where the security exits were located, where the stage was positioned, and precisely where my family would be seated. Every variable had to be strictly controlled. The upcoming week would be a masterclass in psychological endurance. I would let them bask in their fabricated victory. I would let Jamal breathe a sigh of relief as he looked at his falsified bank statements. I would let Diana and Monica revel in the sympathy they harvested from my supposed ruin. They were about to experience the most triumphant week of their lives, and it would be their absolute last. At precisely noon the following day, I sat in my home office with my primary monitor locked onto the live security feed of my parents' Connecticut estate. The high-definition camera mounted above their grand entryway offered a crystal-clear view of the sprawling, circular driveway. A sleek black town car pulled through the wrought iron gates right on schedule. A courier stepped out, dressed in a sharp charcoal uniform, carrying a matte black lockbox. He bypassed the intercom and walked directly to the heavy oak front door, ringing the bell twice. Inside the house, the interior cameras showed Richard sitting in his study nursing a midday scotch. He frowned at the interruption, set his crystal glass down, and walked to the foyer. Diana followed closely behind him, clutching her silk robe, her face pinched in annoyance. Richard pulled open the heavy door. The microphone picked up the crisp audio of the exchange perfectly. Delivery for Richard, Diana, Monica, and Jamal the courier announced, his tone highly professional. Signature required from the head of the household. Richard puffed out his chest, immensely validated by being addressed as the head of the household. He scrawled his signature on the digital pad, taking possession of the heavy black lockbox. The courier turned and departed without another word. Diana immediately hovered over Richard's shoulder, her eyes wide with greedy curiosity. They carried the box into the mahogany study, placing it exactly where Jamal had stolen my identity just days prior. "Call the kids down here," Richard instructed, his voice tight with anticipation. Within minutes, Monica and Jamal hurried into the room. Jamal looked visibly stressed, a sheen of sweat coating his forehead. He was likely agonizing over the fraudulent commercial loan, waiting for the final wire transfer confirmation that Leo had queued up for later that afternoon. Monica looked equally frantic, gripping her phone as if waiting for her next influx of social media validation. "What is it?" Jamal asked, pacing near the Vintage Globe bar. "I am expecting important calls today, Richard." Richard ignored the disrespect and unlatched the silver clasps on the black box. He lifted the lid, revealing 4 thick envelopes resting on a bed of crushed velvet. The envelopes were made of heavy cream cardstock, sealed with an intricate gold foil crest. The crest belonged to the Apex Innovation Board, the dummy corporation Sylvia had established specifically for this execution. Richard handed an envelope to each of them. I zoomed in on the camera feed, watching their expressions shift in real time. Jamal tore his envelope open first. He pulled out a heavy embossed ticket and a personalized letter. As he read the heavy cursive font, the color returned to his face in a massive wave of euphoric relief. His hands literally stopped shaking. "I do not believe it," Jamal breathed, reading the letter aloud for the room. "You are cordially invited to the Global Innovation Investment Gala as honored VIP guests of the Apex Innovation Board. A private consortium of angel investors has been closely monitoring the market resilience of Vanguard Apex Investments and wishes to discuss a proprietary capital injection during the evening's private networking session." Diana gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "The Global Innovation Investment Gala. Richard, that is the most exclusive financial event in the city. The country club president has been trying to get off the waitlist for 3 years. Jamal let out a loud, barking laugh of pure adrenaline. He threw his head back, running a hand over his face. They have been watching me. The big players have actually been watching my portfolio. I told you, Richard. I told you I just needed to weather the storm. They want to inject capital. This is the bailout. This is the $10 million lifeline. The sheer level of delusion required to believe a shadow billionaire was suddenly interested in saving a failing over-leveraged brokerage firm was astounding. But Jamal was a desperate narcissist drowning in debt. He was primed to believe any narrative that validated his inflated ego. He completely ignored the reality of his catastrophic derivative losses, instantly convincing himself that his innate financial genius had attracted elite attention. Monica shrieked with delight, throwing her arms around Jamal's neck. I knew it, baby. I knew we were destined for this. I need a new gown. I have to call my stylist immediately. I am going to vlog the entire preparation process. My followers are going to die when they see us at the VIP tables. Richard poured himself a fresh glass of scotch, a smug, victorious smile spreading across his aged features. He raised his glass toward Jamal. This is why we make the hard choices for the family. We protected your firm by eliminating Clara from the equation. Now we are reaping the rewards. The Blackwell name is about to ascend to the absolute top tier of Manhattan society. We are untouchable. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, my face impassive as I watched them celebrate my fabricated demise. They were toasting to their own brilliance, entirely unaware that the champagne they were drinking was poisoned. They truly believed that discarding me was the strategic masterstroke that had unlocked their path to unimaginable wealth. My office door opened and Sylvia walked in, carrying a stack of laminated security badges. She placed them on my desk, her eyes drifting toward the live feed on my monitor. They swallowed the hook, Sylvia noted, observing Jamal pacing around the study, with his gold-foiled ticket held high like a trophy. They did not just swallow it, I replied, minimizing the window. They are currently choking on it with a smile. Is the event security fully briefed on the protocol for next week? Sylvia took a seat, taking out her legal pad. The head of security is a former federal marshal. He understands the assignment perfectly. Your family will be granted full unrestricted access to the VIP lounge. They will be given premium seating right at the front of the main ballroom. The open bar will cater to their every whim. They will feel like royalty right up until the exact moment you step up to the podium. What about the financial regulators and the police? I asked, ensuring every variable was locked in place. I have coordinated with my contact at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, Sylvia confirmed. The digital sandbox we built around the fraudulent loan will hold the funds securely. On the night of the gala, the fraud division will be waiting in the hotel's private security suite. The moment you present the audio and visual evidence of their conspiracy, the authorities will move in. We have secured warrants for wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. I looked at the stack of security badges on my desk. The countdown had officially begun. I had exactly 1 week to finalize my keynote speech. It would not be a standard presentation on biotechnology or corporate growth. It would be a meticulous public autopsy of an abusive family. I was going to stand in front of the wealthiest investors in the nation and meticulously dismantle the Blackwell facade, piece by piece, until nothing remained but ash. Let Monica buy her expensive gown, I said, turning back to the Manhattan skyline outside my window. Let Richard boast to his country club friends. Let Diana plan her triumphant entrance into high society. They are dressing up for their own funeral. 7 days later, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel hummed with the electric energy of billions of dollars concentrated in a single room. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the immaculate white tablecloths and towering floral centerpieces. Waiters in crisp black and white uniforms glided effortlessly across the polished marble floors, carrying trays of vintage champagne and caviar. This was the pinnacle of Manhattan high society, an exclusive ecosystem where fortunes were forged and destroyed between courses. I stood in the private observation suite overlooking the ballroom floor, watching the crowd gather. The glass was heavily tinted, allowing me an unobstructed view of the elite guests, while keeping my presence entirely concealed. Sylvia stood to my right, her arms crossed, her eyes tracking the entrance. Leo was stationed at the control console behind us, tapped directly into the hotel's extensive audiovisual network. They just cleared the security checkpoint, Leo announced, pulling up a high-definition feed from the lobby. The guests of honor have arrived. I stepped closer to the glass, looking down at the grand entrance. Richard, Diana, Monica, and Jamal walked through the gilded double doors. My family looked like a desperate caricature of wealth. Richard wore a tuxedo that was a decade out of style, his posture rigid with an unearned sense of superiority. Diana was dripping in heavy, antiquated jewelry, her neck craning as she frantically scanned the room to see who she recognized and who was recognizing her. Monica was a walking spectacle. She wore a plunging emerald green gown that was far too flashy for an elegant corporate gala. She held her smartphone high, panning the camera across the room to capture content for her followers, desperately documenting her proximity to the 1%. But it was Jamal who held my complete attention. Even from the observation suite, I could see the frantic, terrified energy vibrating beneath his tailored suit. His smile was painfully forced. His eyes darted around the room with the frantic intensity of a cornered animal. He was not here to celebrate. He was here to beg for his life. The $500,000 fraudulent loan had been quarantined in Sylvia's escrow account exactly as planned. Jamal had seen the initial approval notification, but the funds had never actually hit his offshore shell company. He was currently operating on pure panic, hoping to secure the $10 million phantom investment tonight before his entire world collapsed. "Watch him," I instructed, tracking Jamal as he broke away from Monica and headed straight for the bar. "He is completely unraveling. He knows the auditors are waiting for him tomorrow morning." The maitre d' approached my family, checked their forged VIP credentials, and immediately escorted them to a prime table right at the front of the stage. Diana's face lit up with absolute triumph as she realized they were seated closer to the podium than a prominent tech billionaire and 2 state senators. She genuinely believed her husband's obsolete banking career had earned them this placement. She had no idea she was being seated in the splash zone. "I want audio on their table," I told Leo. Leo adjusted a slider on his mixing board. We had planted a directional microphone in the floral centerpiece of their specific table. The ambient noise of the ballroom faded slightly, replaced by the clear, isolated voices of my family. "Can you believe the placement?" Richard, Diana gushed, taking her seat and smoothing her dress. "We are practically on the stage. I told you the Blackwell name still commands absolute respect in this city." Richard unbuttoned his jacket, projecting an air of supreme confidence. "It is about time these new money tech startups recognize traditional financial authority." "Jamal, stop fidgeting with your cuffs. You look like a nervous intern. We are here to close a deal with the Apex Innovation Board. You need to project strength." "I am trying." Richard Jamal's voice crackled through the speaker, thin and strained. "But no one has approached us yet. The email said the angel investor wanted to meet during the networking session. I need to find the representative. I need to secure the capital injection tonight." "Then get up and network," Richard ordered, waving a hand dismissively. "Go introduce yourself to the table next to us. Hand out your cards. Show them you belong here." I watched as Jamal stood up, smoothed his jacket, and approached a group of older men in bespoke suits. He plastered on his charismatic broker smile, extending his hand and launching into his practiced pitch. He spoke rapidly, aggressively, selling the illusion of Vanguard Apex investments, throwing out fabricated growth metrics, and boasting about his highly leveraged crypto portfolios. The men listened politely, exchanging subtle glances of amusement. What Jamal did not know was that those men were not potential investors. They were senior board members of my own biotechnology firm. I had specifically instructed them to engage him, to let him talk, and to let him dig his grave even deeper in front of reliable corporate witnesses. Up in the suite, Sylvia let out a sharp laugh. "He is actively committing verbal securities fraud to your own executives. He is pitching a bankrupt firm to billionaires and acting like he is doing them a favor." While Jamal humiliated himself, Monica was busy recording a live video at the table. She adjusted her angle to ensure the stage and the expensive champagne were clearly visible in the frame. We are so incredibly blessed to be here tonight as VIP guests. Monica cooed into her phone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Surrounding yourself with success is the only way to elevate your mindset. It has been a difficult week for my family, dealing with some very toxic, destructive energy from someone who chose a darker path. But tonight is about focusing on the light, protecting our peace and building our empire. She was using my fabricated addiction as a contrast to her glamorous evening. She was standing in a room paid for by my success, broadcasting a lie about my downfall to boost her own profile. The absolute lack of shame was a marvel to witness. Diana leaned over to Monica, entirely unaware of the recording. Make sure you tag the location, Monica. Let Aunt Brenda see exactly where we are. She thought we were crazy for cutting Clara off. Let her see what happens when you remove a useless burden from your life. The universe rewards you. I did not flinch. I did not feel a single drop of sorrow. I simply reached for the small microphone on the console that connected directly to the backstage production manager. The family has settled in, I said, my voice echoing with icy authority. The networking session is over. Initiate the main program. It is time for the keynote address. The lights in the grand ballroom flickered twice, signaling the end of the cocktail hour and prompting guests to find their seats. Down on the floor, Jamal ignored the universal cue. He was completely cornered in his own desperation, physically blocking two of my senior board members from returning to their table. Richard had joined him now, sensing the closing window of opportunity to secure the phantom $10 million investment. I kept my eyes fixed on the live monitor in the observation suite. Leo adjusted the audio feed so I could hear every frantic word spilling from my brother-in-law. You have to look at the predictive modeling for Vanguard Apex. Jamal insisted, his voice pitching higher as he shoved a glossy prospectus into the hands of my chief financial officer. We are projecting a 40% yield on these crypto derivatives by the third quarter. The market volatility is actually our greatest asset right now. A $10 million injection tonight guarantees you ground floor equity before we go public. My chief financial officer, a brilliant 55-year-old man named Harrison, who managed my personal 9-figure portfolio, looked at the brochure with mild, polite disdain. He knew exactly what he was holding. It was a fabricated financial document designed to hide a $4 million black hole. A 40% yield in this current regulatory environment, Harrison asked, raising a highly skeptical eyebrow. That is an exceptionally aggressive forecast, Jamal. How exactly are you mitigating the risk on the back end? Your margin exposure must be astronomical. Jamal swallowed hard. A heavy bead of sweat visibly rolled down his temple. He tugged nervously at the collar of his expensive Italian suit, the suffocating reality of his own lies closing in around him. He was used to pitching to gullible suburbanites at my father's country club, people who trusted the Blackwell name over actual due diligence. He was entirely unprepared to face a veteran Wall Street shark who secretly answered directly to me. Our risk management protocols are proprietary, Richard interjected, stepping up beside Jamal to form a united front of absolute fraud. My father puffed out his chest, attempting to use his outdated banking authority to bully Harrison into submission. I spent 30 years in upper management at Chase. I personally oversee the risk assessment for Vanguard Apex. The algorithms my son-in-law uses are foolproof. You are looking at a closed-loop system with zero liability. I let out a harsh breath in the observation suite. Richard was actively lying to cover for Jamal. He was leveraging his entire career reputation to sell a toxic asset, completely unaware he was speaking to a man who literally held the forensic audit of Jamal's catastrophic failure on a secure tablet in his briefcase. Zero liability is a fascinating concept in modern finance, Harrison replied smoothly, handing the glossy prospectus back to Jamal without a second glance. Especially considering the upcoming external audits most boutique brokerages are facing next week. I assume Vanguard Apex is fully prepared for absolute transparency. Jamal actually flinched. The mention of the impending audit struck him like a physical blow. He shot a panicked, wide-eyed glance at Richard. Audits are standard procedure. Richard deflected quickly, his own smile becoming tight and brittle. We welcome transparency. But this specific equity offering is incredibly time-sensitive. The Apex Innovation Board invited us here tonight because they recognize our unique market position. We are prepared to sign term sheets this evening. They were begging. My proud, arrogant father, the man who had just days earlier called me a useless failure and ordered me to live under a bridge, was standing in a rented tuxedo, practically begging on his knees for a bailout. He was selling his soul to save his fragile ego. I assure you, we are very aware of your unique market position, Harrison said, his tone laced with a profound double meaning that only Sylvia and I understood. But I believe the keynote address is beginning. We should all take our seats. I promise you by the end of tonight, everyone in this room will know exactly what Vanguard Apex Investments is truly worth. Jamal let out a loud exhale of relief, completely misinterpreting Harrison's ominous warning as a sign of genuine interest. Thank you, Jamal said vigorously, shaking Harrison's hand. You will not regret this. The Blackwell family honors its commitments. Richard nodded solemnly, buttoning his jacket as they turned back toward their VIP table. They strutted across the polished marble floor with renewed arrogance, convinced they had just secured their salvation. They thought they had outsmarted the market, outsmarted the auditors, and successfully outsmarted me by using my stolen identity as their safety net. Down at the table, Diana and Monica were already celebrating. Monica had her phone propped up against a crystal water glass, recording a live stream for her followers. We just had the most incredible networking session, Monica beamed into the camera, her emerald gown catching the spotlight. Jamal is literally changing the landscape of modern investing. It is so important to surround yourself with high-value people and cut out the dead weight holding you back. Success is a choice, guys. Diana clinked her champagne flute against Monica's glass. To family legacy, my mother said loudly, making sure the neighboring tables heard her, and to knowing exactly when to trim the dying branches from the family tree. I stood in the observation suite, my hands resting lightly on the cold glass. They were entirely drunk on their own cruelty. They had spent the entire week tearing my name to shreds, ruining my reputation to protect a criminal, and now they were toasting to my absolute demise. The floor is clear, Leo reported from the control console, snapping me out of my intense focus. The production manager is cueing the house lights. Microphone feed is live and patched directly to the main sound system. Security has sealed the perimeter doors. Nobody leaves this ballroom until you give the executive order. Sylvia stepped up beside me, handing me a sleek, encrypted tablet. It contained the complete digital dossier. The forged loan applications, the IP address, traces the audio recordings of their conspiracy, and the damning financial ledgers proving Jamal's massive embezzlement. It was the murder weapon, and it was fully loaded. They think they are untouchable, Sylvia murmured, watching Richard proudly take his seat at the front of the room. They think they have won. They have won a front-row seat to their own destruction, I replied, taking the tablet. I smoothed the fabric of my custom-tailored midnight blue gown. The dress was a masterpiece of sharp architectural lines, projecting absolute power and clinical authority. I did not look like the scared dropout they had thrown onto the streets. I looked like the apex predator they never saw coming. The heavy velvet curtains at the back of the suite parted, revealing the private staircase that led directly down to the main stage. The ambient chatter of the ballroom abruptly died down as the massive crystal chandeliers dimmed to a soft, dramatic low. A single bright spotlight hit the center of the podium. It is time, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. I turned and walked toward the staircase, leaving the safety of the shadows. The hunt was over. It was time to pull the trigger. I descended the private spiraling staircase with slow, deliberate steps. The thick plush carpeting muffled the sound of my heels, allowing me to move like a phantom through the heavy darkness of the backstage corridor. Every breath I took felt crisp and calculated. The air in the backstage area smelled faintly of ozone and expensive floral arrangements, a sharp contrast to the suffocating tension I knew was currently gripping the ballroom floor. I paused just behind the massive velvet curtain that separated the wings from the main stage. Through a small gap in the heavy fabric, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of my family's table. The main ballroom was entirely silent now. The low hum of networking and the clinking of crystal glasses had vanished the moment the house lights dimmed. A prominent event director stepped up to the acrylic podium in the center of the stage. He adjusted the microphone, the feedback echoing briefly through the cavernous space before settling into a crisp, professional resonance. Ladies and gentlemen, the event director began, his voice carrying a rich, authoritative cadence that commanded absolute attention. Welcome to the focal point of the Global Innovation Investment Gala. Tonight we are gathered to celebrate the disruptors, the visionaries, and the relentless minds that drive our economy forward. But tonight is also about something much more significant than standard networking. Down at the VIP table, Jamal leaned forward so aggressively he almost knocked over his water goblet. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and fixated on the podium. Beside him, Richard mirrored the posture, his hands steepled under his chin in an arrogant display of faux intellectualism. They were salivating. They were waiting for their financial savior to be announced, completely oblivious to the fact that the butcher was already in the room. We have a very special presentation this evening. The event director continued, his gaze sweeping over the audience of billionaires, hedge fund managers, and venture capitalists. As many of you know, this gala relies on the immense generosity of our anonymous angel investors. These are individuals who operate in the highest echelons of the market-wielding capital capable of transforming failing industries into global powerhouses. Tonight, we have the distinct honor of hosting our primary benefactor in person. A murmur of excited anticipation rippled through the elite crowd. Men in bespoke suits and women in haute couture leaned in, whispering to one another. Identifying the mystery investor was the ultimate prize in this room. Securing a meeting with this person meant guaranteed success. I kept my eyes fixed entirely on my family. Monica pulled out her phone, adjusting the angle to ensure the stage was perfectly framed for her live stream. She leaned over to Diana, pointing at the screen and whispering frantically. They were preparing to capture the moment, ready to leverage their physical proximity to this billionaire for their own social climbing agendas. Diana sat tall, smoothing her designer dress, her face locked in an expression of haughty expectation. This individual is a true titan of modern industry, the event director announced, his voice rising in volume to build the dramatic tension. She is a self-made pioneer who revolutionized the biotechnology sector by refusing to accept the status quo. Starting with absolutely nothing but her own relentless drive, she built a proprietary manufacturing empire that now supplies the most exclusive cosmetic brands across Europe and North America. Her laboratories hold patents that have redefined chemical engineering, and her personal business acumen is widely considered to be among the most ruthless and brilliant in Manhattan. At the VIP table, Jamal nodded vigorously, as if he personally understood the grit required to build a legitimate empire. The irony was physically nauseating. The man who had fraudulently gambled away millions of dollars of client funds and attempted to steal a $500,000 loan using a forged identity was currently applauding the concept of hard work. Richard clapped his hands together, his face glowing with greedy approval. They were practically worshipping the very woman they had thrown onto the streets. But her impact extends far beyond the boardroom, the event director stated, projecting a tone of deep reverence. Just this week, she finalized a record-breaking corporate merger while simultaneously authorizing a $2 million autonomous grant to support female entrepreneurs breaking free from toxic environments. She understands that true power is not just about accumulating wealth. It is about dismantling the obstacles that hold others back and holding the corrupt strictly accountable. The applause in the ballroom swelled, echoing loudly off the gilded ceiling. I checked my pulse. It was remarkably steady, resting at a calm resting rate. I had spent 33 years allowing their opinions to dictate my heart rate, allowing their cruel remarks to make my chest tight with anxiety. Tonight, my physiological response was entirely under my own control. I was a machine executing a flawless program. Sylvia stepped up softly behind me in the darkness of the wing. She handed me the encrypted tablet containing the digital execution files. They are practically vibrating with excitement out there, Sylvia whispered, her tone dripping with dark amusement. Jamal looks like he is about to run onto the stage and beg for a check. Let him beg, I replied quietly. keeping my eyes glued to the gap in the curtain. It will make the crash that much more spectacular. The event director raised his hands, signaling for the applause to cease. The ballroom complied instantly, plunging back into a hushed, breathless silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," the director said, stepping back from the acrylic podium and extending his arm toward the heavy velvet curtains where I stood. "It is my absolute privilege to introduce the chairwoman of this gala, the founder and chief executive officer of our lead sponsor, and the woman holding the keys to the future of innovation. Please direct your attention to the center stage." On that precise cue, the entire lighting system of the grand ballroom cut out. The room was plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. A collective gasp echoed from the hundreds of guests. The sudden absence of light was a theatrical tactic we had carefully orchestrated to completely disorient the audience and wipe away any remaining sense of comfort. Down at the VIP table, the glowing screen of Monica's smartphone was the only source of light, casting a harsh, unnatural glare across her confused face. I saw Jamal half stand from his chair, his silhouette tense and rigid in the dark. For 10 agonizingly long seconds, the darkness held. The silence grew heavy, thick with mounting tension and confusion. The elite members of Manhattan high society were entirely at my mercy, holding their breath in the pitch-black void. Then, with the sharp crack of an electrical switch, a single blinding beam of pure white light pierced the darkness. The spotlight hit the exact center of the stage, creating a harsh, brilliant circle of illumination against the dark mahogany floorboards. I gripped the encrypted tablet in my right hand, my knuckles pale. I squared my shoulders, lifting my chin to project absolute unyielding authority. I stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtain and walked directly into the blinding light. The spotlight tracked my movements with predatory precision. The custom midnight blue silk of my gown caught the harsh illumination, shifting like liquid armor around my body. The architectural cut of the dress featured sharp, severe shoulders and a plunging neckline that demanded absolute attention without surrendering a single ounce of dignity. I wore no heavy jewelry, no ostentatious displays of wealth, like the rented pearls currently choking my mother's neck. True power did not require decoration. It simply occupied space and forced everyone else to adjust to its presence. A collective murmur rippled through the grand ballroom. Hundreds of the most influential figures in global finance shifted in their seats, craning their necks to get a better look at the elusive billionaire who controlled their market sectors. They saw a titan, they saw a corporate kingmaker, but at the front table, separated from the stage by a mere 10 feet of polished marble, my family saw a ghost. I stopped at the very edge of the stage, letting the silence stretch until it became physically oppressive. I locked my gaze squarely on the VIP table. I did not look at the state senators to my left. I did not acknowledge the hedge fund managers to my right. I looked directly into the eyes of the 4 people who had orchestrated my federal framing just days prior. The psychological collapse happened in distinct, agonizingly slow stages. Monica was the first to comprehend the visual data her brain was receiving. She was still holding her smartphone high in the air, actively broadcasting to her thousands of followers. I watched her perfectly contoured face contort into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The smug, self-satisfied smile melted off her face like wax held to a flame. Her hand began to tremble so violently that her phone slipped from her grasp. It hit the crystal water glass with a sharp clink before clattering onto the white linen tablecloth. The live stream kept running, capturing the exact second the golden child realized her entire narrative was a humiliating fiction. Monica stared at me, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The cognitive dissonance of seeing her homeless dropout sister commanding a room of billionaires was fundamentally breaking her reality. Next to her, Diana's reaction was a masterclass in physical shock. My mother sat frozen, her manicured hand gripping the stem of her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles turned stark white. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically from my face to my custom gown to the massive corporate branding projected on the screens behind me. She was desperately searching for a punchline, A mistake, a sudden announcement that this was all an elaborate prank. But the heavy, respectful silence of the elite crowd confirmed the absolute truth. I was the angel investor. I was the CEO. Diana's chest heaved as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. The woman who had spent 33 years calling me a worthless failure was currently sitting at a table paid for by my charity drinking champagne, subsidized by my fortune. Richard's arrogant facade disintegrated with a brutal, satisfying finality. My father had spent the last hour aggressively pitching a bankrupt brokerage firm to my own senior executives. He had puffed out his chest and leveraged his outdated banking credentials, entirely oblivious to the fact that he was auditioning for the very daughter he had exiled. Now, staring up at me from the splash zone, all the color drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly ashen gray. His broad shoulders collapsed inward. He suddenly looked like an old, powerless man. The terrifying realization that he had just handed my stolen Social Security card to a criminal, actively conspiring to ruin a billionaire with unlimited legal resources, hit him with the force of a freight train. He knew with absolute certainty that he was legally doomed. But Jamal's reaction was the true centerpiece of the evening. My brother-in-law was trapped in a state of absolute paralysis. The sweat that had been beading on his forehead during his desperate networking session was now flowing freely down his temples. His expensive Italian suit suddenly looked like a straitjacket. Jamal was a fraudster who operated on probabilities, and his mental calculator was currently processing the fatal math of his situation. He had stolen the identity of the most powerful woman in the room. I watched his eyes drop from my face to the encrypted tablet held loosely in my right hand. I saw the exact moment the realization struck him. The $500,000 commercial bridge loan, the silent approval notification, the money that had suspiciously stalled before hitting his Cayman Island shell account. Jamal realized simultaneously that I was the billionaire investor he needed to save his firm, and I was the mark he had just committed a felony to exploit. There was no angel investor coming to rescue him. There was only the victim of his wire fraud standing on a stage holding the digital execution files. Jamal literally stopped breathing. He clutched the edge of the dining table, looking as though he might physically vomit onto the pristine floral centerpieces. He was trapped. The security guards standing at the perimeter doors were not there to keep the press out. They were there to keep him in. I did not offer a polite smile. I did not give a welcoming wave. I maintained a gaze so devoid of mercy that the ambient temperature in the room seemed to plummet. I slowly raised the encrypted tablet, tapping the screen once to activate the audio-visual synchronization with the ballroom's main projection system. The massive screens behind me flared to life, replacing the corporate logos with a stark black background. The entire ballroom held its breath, sensing the heavy, dangerous shift in the atmosphere. The elite investors, the politicians, and the corporate sharks instantly recognized the scent of blood in the water. They knew a public execution was about to commence. I stepped off the podium and began my descent down the short staircase leading directly to the ballroom floor. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a wide, unobstructed path between the stage and the VIP table. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble, each step echoing like the ticking of a metronome, counting down the final seconds of their freedom. Richard, Diana, Monica, and Jamal remained bolted to their chairs, immobilized by a primal, suffocating terror. They were finally seeing the real Clara, and she had come to collect their debts. I stopped exactly 3 feet from the edge of their table. The distance was close enough to see the heavy beads of sweat catching the chandelier light on Jamal's forehead, yet far enough to maintain an impenetrable barrier of authority. Behind me, Sylvia stepped up silently, standing at my right flank like a perfectly tailored sentinel, holding the encrypted tablet against her chest. The entire ballroom remained suspended in a breathless vacuum. The clinking of silverware had ceased entirely. The murmurs of the elite crowd had evaporated into nothing. Hundreds of high-net-worth individuals were watching the dynamic unfold, sensing that this was not a standard corporate address, but a highly calculated execution. My father was the first to break under the sheer crushing weight of the silence. Richard possessed a survival instinct forged by decades of corporate climbing. He realized instantly that the only way to survive the public humiliation of sitting at the table of the keynote speaker without being recognized as her family was to forcefully insert himself into the narrative. He needed the room to believe my wealth was an extension of his own legacy. Richard pushed back his chair and stood up. His movements were jerky and uncoordinated, completely lacking his usual arrogant swagger. He forced his facial muscles into a wide, desperate smile that failed to reach his panic-stricken eyes. He buttoned his rented tuxedo jacket and stepped around the table toward me, extending both of his arms in a theatrical display of paternal pride. "Clara, my beautiful daughter," Richard projected his voice loudly, ensuring the surrounding tables of billionaires and hedge fund managers could hear him clearly. "You have absolutely outdone yourself tonight. Your mother and I are simply overwhelmed with pride. We always knew you possessed the Blackwell drive. Keeping this level of success a secret from us just to surprise us at this gala is an incredible achievement. Come here and give your father a hug." He took another step forward, his arms open wide, gambling his entire social standing on the assumption that I would play along to avoid a public scene. He was relying on the decades of conditioned submission he had beaten into me. I did not move a single muscle. I did not raise my hand to stop him, nor did I step backward. I simply leveled a stare at him so profoundly empty and devoid of warmth that he froze in his tracks. The silence in the ballroom deepened, turning sharp and jagged. "Do not take another step toward me, Richard," I said. My voice was amplified by the discreet microphone clipped to my collar, echoing off the gilded walls of the Plaza Hotel. It was not a shout. It was a cold, surgical command. Richard's arms dropped slowly to his sides. His fake smile wavered, twitching at the corners as the reality of my tone registered. The surrounding guests exchanged shocked glances. The facade of the proud father was crumbling in real time. "Clara, please," Richard hissed, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper meant only for me. "People are staring. You are embarrassing the family. Play along and we can discuss whatever this is in private. We are your parents. You are the man who exactly 72 hours ago stood in your dining room and ordered me to go live under a bridge." I replied, my amplified voice carrying the undeniable ring of absolute truth to every corner of the ballroom. "You are the man who called me a worthless failure and a permanent stain on your country club reputation. You do not get to claim my success tonight when you gleefully celebrated my fabricated ruin 3 days ago." Diana scrambled to her feet next. My mother realized Richard's authoritarian approach had failed catastrophically, so she instantly pivoted to her favorite tactic, playing the victimized peacemaker. She clasped her hands together in a gesture of pleading maternal concern, her knuckles white. "Sweetheart, please," Diana implored, forcing a tremor into her voice for the benefit of the audience. "You are clearly having some sort of episode. We are just so relieved you are safe. We have been terrified. We know things got heated at the house, but we only pushed you because we love you. We thought you were struggling. We just wanted you to accept our help." I tilted my head, examining her with clinical detachment. "Your help," I echoed, letting the words hang in the heavy air. "You mean the help where you spent the last 3 days calling every single member of our extended family to tell them I was a drug-addicted degenerate? Or do you mean the help where you specifically told my Aunt Brenda that I was an erratic thief capable of anything? Is that the maternal concern you are referring to, Diana?" Diana gasped, her hand flying to her throat in genuine shock. She had no idea how I knew the exact contents of her private phone calls. She stumbled backward, bumping into Monica's chair. Monica was still sitting frozen. The screen of her smartphone had gone dark, ending her live stream, but the damage to her lifestyle coaching brand was already permanent. She had built her entire online persona on authenticity and family values, and now she was sitting front row at a masterclass, exposing her as a fraudulent parasite. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with actual tears of terror rather than her usual performative crying. "And Jamal," I continued, shifting my gaze to my brother-in-law. Jamal was gripping the edge of the table so hard the veins in his hands were bulging against his dark skin. He looked as though he wanted to bolt for the exit, but the heavy presence of the security detail standing by the doors kept him glued to his seat. I took one slow, deliberate step forward. How was your networking session, Jamal? I asked, my tone dripping with lethal precision. Did you manage to secure that $10 million capital injection for Vanguard Apex Investments? Did you manage to convince my chief financial officer that your proprietary algorithms can hide a $4 million deficit caused by your illegal cryptocurrency leveraging? Jamal let out a strangled, gasping sound. The surrounding tables of elite investors, including the men he had just been pitching, to let out audible murmurs of shock and disgust. The word illegal traveled through the room like a shockwave. You set me up! Jamal choked out, his voice cracking under the weight of his imminent destruction. You sent the email. You arranged this whole thing. I did not create your $4 million deficit, Jamal, I corrected smoothly. I did not force you to over-leverage your client's funds. And I certainly did not force you to orchestrate a federal crime to cover your tracks. I just provided the stage for you to hang yourself. Richard stepped forward again, desperation completely overriding his sense of self-preservation. He slammed his hand onto the white tablecloth. Clara, that is enough. You are making wild accusations. You are trying to destroy this family over a petty grudge. You have no proof of anything you are saying. You are just a bitter, vindictive child throwing a tantrum with a microphone. I had been waiting for that exact defense. They always relied on the assumption that my claims were just emotional outbursts, devoid of factual backing. They thought they could gaslight a room full of billionaires just like they had gaslighted me my entire life. I turned slightly and extended my hand toward Sylvia. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, and placed the encrypted tablet directly into my palm. I do not make wild accusations, Richard, I stated, turning my attention to the massive screens towering above the stage behind me. I make forensic diagnoses, and I always bring the receipts. I tapped a single icon on the encrypted tablet. Above my head, the massive digital screens that spanned the width of the ballroom flared to life. The corporate logos vanished instantly, replaced by a high-resolution scan of a commercial bridge loan application. The document was magnified so perfectly that every single forged detail was visible to the hundreds of elite investors seated in the room. I let the image burn into their retinas for 5 seconds before I spoke. What you are looking at is a $500,000 fraudulent loan application submitted 72 hours ago. I announced, my voice echoing with clinical detachment. The applicant listed is me, Clara. The guarantor signature at the bottom is mine. The attached W-2 forms claim I am a struggling mid-level manager. However, if you direct your attention to the right side of the screen, you will see the digital forensic trace of this document. I swiped my finger across the tablet. A complex routing map materialized next to the forged application. Bright red lines tracked the data packet from a predatory lending firm in Delaware, bouncing through 2 clumsy proxy servers and landing directly on a specific IP address. The primary upload occurred on the secure internal network of Vanguard Apex Investments. I stated, turning my gaze directly to Jamal, who was now trembling visibly. Furthermore, the master login credentials used to bypass the corporate firewall and authorize this wire fraud belong exclusively to senior broker Jamal. The ballroom erupted in a cacophony of shocked gasps and hushed, aggressive whispers. I saw 3 different hedge fund managers at a nearby table immediately pull out their phones, frantically typing messages to their compliance departments to sever any existing ties with Vanguard. Jamal had not just lost a phantom investment, he had just broadcast his criminality to the most powerful financial regulators in Manhattan. He was bleeding out on a public stage, and I was holding the knife. Richard stepped forward, his face flushed with panicked rage. "This proves nothing," my father shouted, his voice cracking under the strain of his crumbling empire. "Anyone could have hacked his terminal. You fabricated this data to frame him because you are a jealous, unhinged dropout." I smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that caused my father to physically recoil. "I anticipated you would invoke the hacking defense, Richard. That is exactly why my cybersecurity team dug deeper. We traced the origin of the forged tax returns and the stolen Social Security card used in the application." Another swipe on my tablet. A new data tree bloomed on the massive screens, showing a direct peer-to-peer file transfer occurring 24 hours before the loan submission. The geographic origin point glowed bright red on the map of Connecticut. The foundational identity documents were scanned and transmitted directly from the IP address. Registered to your private estate, I declared, looking at my parents. But I understand that digital fingerprints can be abstract. Some people prefer tangible auditory proof of a criminal conspiracy. I pressed the final execution command on Sylvia's tablet. The high-fidelity audio recording we had extracted from their mahogany study blasted through the ballroom's state-of-the-art surround sound system. The crisp, unmistakable voices of my family filled the vast space, stripping away any plausible deniability. The entire room heard Jamal's panicked voice begging for assurance. The Vanguard compliance team pushed the audit timeline up. When they check the derivative ledgers, they will see the $4 million deficit. I am going to federal prison. Then came Richard's booming, arrogant command, completely unedited and raw. Take these documents. Apply for a high-yield commercial bridge loan using her identity as the primary guarantor. Secure $500,000 to inject into your Vanguard accounts before the auditors arrive. The recording continued, mercilessly exposing Diana's calculated cruelty as her crisp voice laid out the smear campaign. Clara just stood in our dining room and demanded a handout. She is clearly unstable. Tomorrow morning I will begin calling Brenda and the rest of the extended family. When the authorities come knocking about a fraudulent commercial loan, they will find a trail of evidence pointing to a desperate woman who stole money to fund her habits. The audio concluded with Richard's sickening justification. If the fallout hits, it hits Clara. It is exactly what she deserves for being such a massive disappointment to this family. Consider it her final contribution to our legacy. The recording clicked off, plunging the ballroom into a silence so profound it felt suffocating. The air was devoid of oxygen. The elite members of Manhattan high society stared at my family with absolute unadulterated revulsion. The illusion of the perfect, wealthy, upstanding Blackwell family had been entirely vaporized in less than 60 seconds. They were exposed not just as white-collar criminals, but as clinical sociopaths who were actively plotting to send their own flesh and blood to a federal penitentiary to cover their debts. Diana collapsed back into her chair, covering her face with her hands, trembling uncontrollably as the reality of her social annihilation sank in. She knew she would never be allowed inside a country club, a charity gala, or a respectable dining room ever again. She was a complete pariah. Monica, realizing her entire lifestyle coaching brand was currently burning to ash, attempted a pathetic pivot. She shoved her chair back, pointing a trembling finger at Jamal. "I did not know the extent of it," Monica shrieked, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "He lied to me. He told me it was just a temporary cash flow problem. I am a victim here too." I tapped the tablet one last time. A final document materialized on the screens above. It was a comprehensive financial ledger linking the stolen funds directly to Monica's personal accounts. "You spent $40,000 of stolen client funds on luxury trips. You knew absolutely everything." "You are a fraud," I whispered. The undeniable proof hung above us, illuminating the absolute ruin of my sister's carefully curated existence. Monica stared at the bank statements radiating from the massive screens, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The crowd of elite investors, people she had spent hours trying to impress, were now looking at her with undisguised contempt. She had claimed to be a self-made lifestyle coach, a beacon of authenticity and mental health advocacy. Now everyone in the room knew her designer wardrobe and European vacations were paid for by defrauding innocent clients and attempting to steal her sister's identity. Her narcissistic brain simply could not process the total collapse of her false reality. Instead of showing an ounce of remorse or acknowledging her complicity, Monica completely shattered. She threw her hands up, knocking over a crystal champagne flute that shattered against the marble floor. She spun wildly toward our parents, her voice reaching a shrill, hysterical pitch. "This is your fault," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Richard and Diana. "You told us to do it. You said Clara was a disposable loser and that nobody would ever care. You practically shoved her documents down Jamal's throat to save your own country club reputation. Do not look at me like I am the mastermind. I am just a victim of your toxic parenting. Diana gasped, clutching her chest, as if physically struck by her golden child's vicious betrayal. After decades of praising Monica and treating me like an outcast, my mother was finally experiencing the true nature of the monster she had raised. A narcissist holds no loyalty to anyone but themselves. When the ship sinks, they will eagerly drown their own parents just to stay afloat for 5 more seconds. Richard grabbed Monica by the arm, trying to force her to sit down and stop making a public spectacle, but she violently shoved him away. "You ruined my brand!" Monica screamed, turning her fury back toward me. "I have brand deals lined up. I have a following. You set this up to destroy my life because you have always been jealous of my beauty and my success. You are a psychotic, jealous failure, Clara." I stood perfectly still, watching her unravel. "I am not jealous. Monica," I said, my voice steady and cold over the amplified microphone. "I am just holding up a mirror." While Monica threw her tantrum, Jamal had been slowly edging away from the table, his eyes darting frantically toward the service exits at the back of the ballroom. He was a cornered animal, realizing the trap had fully sprung. He took 2 rapid steps backward, preparing to bolt. Before he could take a third step, the heavy mahogany doors at the main entrance swung open with violent force. A team of 6 federal agents wearing dark suits and tactical windbreakers strode into the ballroom. Their presence commanded immediate, absolute authority. The room parted for them instantly, the wealthy guests scrambling backward to clear a path. The lead agent, a tall, imposing woman with a steely gaze, walked straight toward the VIP table. Jamal froze, all the blood rushing from his face. His knees buckled slightly, his expensive Italian suit sagging around his suddenly hollow frame. He raised his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender before the agents even reached him. "Jamal Washington," the lead agent announced, her voice cutting through the thick silence of the ballroom. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and massive securities fraud." 2 agents moved in swiftly, grabbing Jamal by the arms and spinning him around. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly, serving as the final punctuation mark on his fraudulent career. Jamal did not fight. He just let out a quiet, pathetic whimper as they secured his wrists behind his back. "This is a mistake," Jamal babbled, his eyes darting wildly toward the investors he had been pitching just 20 minutes prior. "I can balance the books. I just need a bridge loan. I am a senior broker at Vanguard. You cannot do this to me in front of these people." "You lost your brokerage license the second you submitted that forged application," the agent stated coldly. "Your compliance department handed over your internal server logs an hour ago. Vanguard Apex is fully cooperating with our investigation. You are going to federal prison." Richard stood paralyzed, watching his golden son-in-law being hauled away in handcuffs. The man he had proudly introduced to his country club associates, the man he had chosen over his own daughter, was exposed as a desperate thief. The social humiliation was absolute. My father looked around at the faces of the billionaires and hedge fund managers. They were staring at him with pure disgust. The Blackwell name, which he valued above all else, was permanently destroyed. Diana began to weep hysterically, reaching out for Jamal as the agents marched him past their table. She was not crying for his freedom. She was crying for the loss of her social standing. Her entire identity was built on projecting an image of flawless upper-class perfection, and that image was currently being escorted out of the Plaza Hotel by federal authorities. "Wait!" Monica shrieked, lunging forward and grabbing the lead agent by the sleeve. "You cannot take him. He pays my credit cards. He manages my brand accounts. If you take him, my assets will be frozen. What am I supposed to do about my lifestyle coaching tour next month? I have non-refundable deposits." The federal agent looked at Monica with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. She firmly detached Monica's grip from her jacket. "Ma, your husband has embezzled $4 million of client funds. The Securities and Exchange Commission will be seizing all of your joint assets by tomorrow morning. I highly suggest you cancel your tour and hire a very good defense attorney." Monica collapsed onto the floor, her emerald green designer gown pooling around her on the marble. She began to sob uncontrollably, wailing about her followers, her reputation, and her seized bank accounts. She did not shed a single tear for her husband heading to prison, nor for the innocent clients they had defrauded. She only cried for herself. Sylvia stepped up beside me, lowering the encrypted tablet. The snare had closed perfectly. The criminal had been removed, the accomplices were socially annihilated, and the golden child was weeping on the floor of a ballroom, surrounded by the very elite she had tried so desperately to impress. As the federal agents escorted Jamal out the main doors, the harsh reality of the situation crashed down upon my parents. Richard stared at the empty space where his golden son-in-law had just stood, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. He turned to me, his eyes wide and completely stripped of their former arrogance. "Clara, please," my father stammered, stepping over the shimmering fabric of Monica's dress to reach me. "You have to stop this. You are a billionaire. You can afford the best defense attorneys in the country. You can pay off the debt and make this go away. We are your family." Sylvia stepped forward, her voice cutting through his desperate pleas like shattered glass. "You do not seem to understand your current predicament, Richard. The Securities and Exchange Commission is not just freezing Jamal's accounts. Because you actively provided the stolen identity documents and allowed your home network to be used to facilitate a federal crime, your assets are now considered part of a criminal enterprise." Diana gasped, clutching her husband's arm. "What does that mean?" "It means the federal government has already initiated asset forfeiture," Sylvia stated clinically. "Your bank accounts are frozen. Your investment portfolios are locked. The bank is foreclosing on your Connecticut estate by tomorrow morning because you secretly used it as collateral to cover one of Jamal's earlier margin calls. You are entirely bankrupt." My mother let out a horrific wailing sound. She dropped to her knees right next to Monica, the heavy pearl necklace swinging wildly against her chest. "Clara, you cannot let them take our home," Diana sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of my custom dress. I stepped back, letting her hand grasp nothing but empty air. "We will have nowhere to go. We will be ruined. We will have to live on the streets." I looked down at the two women weeping on the polished marble floor. They were finally experiencing the exact terror and helplessness they had deliberately inflicted upon me for 33 years. They expected me to rescue them, to revert to the obedient scapegoat who always cleaned up their messes. They thought my wealth meant I would instantly forget decades of emotional abuse and financial theft. I reached into the hidden pocket of my gown. My fingers brushed against the crisp folded paper I had carried with me since the night they kicked me out. I pulled out the exact $200 bill Jamal had thrown at my feet in their dining room. I dropped the bill. It fluttered through the quiet ballroom landing perfectly between my mother's shaking hands. "Here, let me help the poor family out," I said, my voice echoing the exact cruel cadence Jamal had used against me. "Take it, Diana. Get yourselves a ride to a decent homeless shelter. I have important investors to entertain tonight, and I really cannot have you ruining the aesthetic." Richard stared at the crumpled bill, completely broken. I turned my back on them, walking away with Sylvia by my side, leaving them to rot in the absolute prison of their own making. 6 months later, the quiet hum of my new Silicon Valley headquarters served as the perfect soundtrack to my absolute peace. I stood on the expansive glass balcony, sipping a fresh espresso, and watched the morning fog roll over the California hills. I had completely relocated my operations to the West Coast, leaving the bitter winters and toxic memories of Connecticut far behind me.